Hello, welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name is Jason Jones, joined by James Copley as always, and we've got plenty of stuff to be getting through on this Monday morning. Starting, James, with a very cold and ultimately very disappointing FA Cup third round tie against Stoke City at the weekend. Sunderland obviously fell behind to an early penalty in that game. Did equalise through Milan Alexic, opening his account for the club. One positive to take from it. But then went on to lose the game in extra time. Niall Ennis scoring a winner for the Potters late on. It was a weird game, wasn't it? In a lot of respects, I think it's fair to say. Obviously, not a huge attendance at the stadium, and dare I say, perhaps a little bit of apathy around the afternoon as well.
I think so, and I don't think that's unique to just Sunderland fans. Obviously, the Sheffield United crowd was really low. There were low attendances up and down the country. There were a few notable exceptions, Leeds and Harrogate, a couple of other clubs as well. But generally, I think and feel that the FA Cup third round has sort of lost its magic, so to speak. Fair play to all of the brave souls that came to the Stadium of Light, because it was very chilly. Football tickets are expensive. I know Sunderland do the best that they can to keep those ticket prices down, but it's a decision that people have to make ultimately. And I think what we've seen is the Premier League clubs aren't really too bothered about the early rounds of the FA Cup, so why should Sunderland fans be as well? Sunderland have received a little bit of stick, really, fans on social media for the low attendance, which I find bizarre. Given Sunderland's average attendance in the Championship is well beyond some Premier League clubs. End of the day, it's not a competition. I think we all understand that, football is the most important thing of all the unimportant things. So sometimes a decision does have to be made. I don't blame anybody who stayed away. It was cold, but it was a strange game. I think because of that lower crowd, it did feel like a bit of a pre-season friendly, didn't it? Thought both teams sort of tentatively came at it like a pre-season friendly. The intensity didn't seem to be there. There was a lot of sort of lax decision making and passing, obviously, from Dan Neil to Simon Moore for the goal, and Luke O'Nien giving away the penalty. So there was all of that sort of stuff. It didn't feel like a proper game, if that makes sense, which is a shame. And to be honest, my overriding thought was, I wish I could have just lost it in normal time. I think the FA Cup was obviously something that was quite largely magical, and I wrote about this on the Sunderland Echo. I still think there were little aspects of magic in that game. Obviously, Harrison Jones made his Stadium of Light debut and his first start for the club. He's a boyhood Sunderland fan, been at the academy from a very young age. So that's a lovely story. And, his family will always remember that. He'll always remember that. Whatever happens in his career, and I hope he goes on to have a fantastic career, but he'll always have that moment at the Stadium of Light. I think that's fantastic. And, I know of a couple of families who were taking primary age school children to the Stadium of Light for the first time against Stoke City as well. So that first game for them is always going to be a little bit magical. So whilst for me personally, it wasn't, Sunderland's greatest game or most exciting, for others, it can be an important fixture. And I think there's that little bit of residue cup magic. I mean, we've played Stoke, twice already this season coming into this game. Pushing for promotion. So, yeah, it did feel like a bit of a training ground exercise at times. But, there's still some talking points to come out of it.
Definitely. I mean, I think you're right. It's a combination of factors, isn't it? It's, like you say, 3 times against Stoke in a little over a month. It's not going to get the pulse racing for a lot of people. It's early January, people are spent up and it was freezing cold. And I know the weather shouldn't be a factor, but it was exceptionally cold at the weekend. And it also wasn't a game that was included on a season ticket. So, people are going to have to be playing extra to go and see Sunderland play Stoke for the 3rd time in a month. All sorts of factors. But like you say, a lot of positives to take from it as well, sort of individual moments of promise and the like. So obviously we mentioned Milan Alexic scoring his first goal for the club. I thought he was really bright when he came on. As you just said there, Harrison Jones making a debut as well. And I thought that he equipped himself really well in the middle of the park. And we sort of mentioned it at the weekend, but really nice to see him alongside 2 fellow academy graduates in Dan Neil and Chris Regan. All round, just a positive thing for the player, but also, excuse me, a testament to Sunderland's youth progression and the way that they've been able to build a squad.
Yeah, and credit to Harrison Jones as well, because it takes a lot of hard work to get to that level of even knocking on the the door of a first team opportunity. I think we underestimate the toll on these young lads' minds and bodies that it takes. So he's done hugely well to get there. Obviously, there's probably a little bit of pressure as well with him being a young lad from the Sunderland area. He supported Sunderland as a boy. He's probably desperate, for it to work, for him to succeed. He captains the under-21s, and I think the biggest compliment you could pay him actually was that in that middle three, he didn't really look out of place. He didn't look like an under-21 player, which I thought he did when he came off the bench against Preston North End in the Carabao Cup. That was a different situation because that team was hugely disjointed and he didn't get very long really to make an impact. But I thought in from the start, he showed some nice touches, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens to Harrison Jones. Obviously, we've signed a midfielder in Enzo Lefebvre. Samed's back, Riggs back from injury, so you wouldn't imagine Harrison Jones is going to get too many opportunities in the Championship. We understand that he's probably going to go out on loan, but you do wonder if that FA Cup appearances maybe opened a couple of other clubs' eyes to the possibility of Harrison Jones. It's sort of expected that he could go to the National League. But you never know. A club sort of higher up the pyramid might have watched that, might have scouted him and thought he's worth a punt. So, a fantastic story for him. I'd like to congratulate him because he's living both of our dreams, isn't he, Jace? We're both Sunderland fans. And I thought the message from his dad, Stephen, on social media before the game was absolutely fantastic. And just a sort of nice reminder of how much it means to lads from this area. I thought it's a lovely story. And I hope he goes on to make 100, 200, 300 appearances for Sunderland. I really do.
Yeah, again, I said at the weekend, but he's a player that we've been harping on about for a long time because we watch a lot of the under-21s, and he is a consistent standout performer for me, alongside Trey Ogunsui, who also made his debut. Obviously, difficult circumstances for him. He came off the bench quite late on and didn't really have too much of an opportunity to prove himself, but it is a first-team debut. And I think that is just rewards for the performances that he's been putting in the season, because he has been borderline sensational for the under-21s. It's easy to forget that he is playing above his age group. He's scoring consistently. He's in the mid-teens already for his goal return. So I think Ogunsui getting a little run out it's nice to see, and I think it was justified as well. I think he's earned that, to be fair. In terms of other debuts, of course, we saw Salis Abdul Samed for the very first time in a Sunderland shirt. Again, maybe not the easiest set of circumstances for him to come in, but did you see enough from him to suggest that he could bring something to this side?
No, absolutely. To me, although it wasn't a masterclass performance or anything like that, and he arguably made a mistake for the winner, didn't he? For Niall Ennis's winner, he was involved in that sort of mix-up. But for me, I thought he's so tidy on the ball. I thought, because when he came on, I just watched him, which was probably to the detriment of the rest of my reporting at the time. But I sort of just watched him, and I thought the positions he was taking up were superb. He always looked to be in space. I'm not going to over-egg it, because obviously he didn't get a chance to show too much. I thought, his passing was decent. He was always looking to get the ball. It's his first football in something like 7 or 8 months, which is, a long time. His first sort of game of any sort of meaning. I think he played once in pre-season when he was still in France. But I thought it was interesting that he sort of dropped straight into that 6th position that allowed Dan Neil to bomb on in a number 8 position. Dan Neil ended up going to centre-back later in the game, but I thought that was interesting. So, yeah, I saw enough to be sort of excited. Obviously, I'll put the brakes on that a little bit because it's not a league game and he's still getting up to speed. But I thought you can just tell when somebody's a football player, can't you? And I just thought, he's got some serious touches about him. He can control the ball, he can pass. And I was really impressed with his desire and work rate at times. I know he was probably coming on and trying to impress and imprint himself on the game, but I thought he ran quite well for the time that he was on the field. So I think it's great to have him as an option going forward. And as I mentioned before, you look at Sunderland's midfield now, and Riggs back, Samed's back, Lefebvre's an option for Burnley. You've got Dan Neil and Joe Bellingham. Milan Alexic has floated around as well, and Harrison Jones underneath that. Suddenly it's like really, really well stocked.
It is, and you sort of start to wonder when all those options are back who the man who probably won't get the minutes is. And I mean, we mentioned all those names, Alan Brown perhaps, but again, he's been very impressive for the most part over the early part of the campaign. So Sunderland have sort of gone from a position whereby they had a threadbare midfield to one that is suddenly starting to look like a little bit of an embarrassment of riches, dare I say. And obviously Enzo Lafay was paraded in front of the Sunderland crowd, that sort of beleaguered Sunderland crowd, just before kick-off. And, just a quick word on him as well, because we sat here, a week ago and basically said, I'm not entirely sure that's going to happen. And sort of made a fool out of both of us, because Sunderland did get that deal over the line, and what a deal it is as well.
Yeah, in fairness to us, I do remember us both saying that it sounds like something Sunderland could do in terms of like there's a Lebris link. So I'll give us a little bit of credit on that. But yeah, I think that our initial reaction just speaks to how much of a coup it is, isn't it? Really, because it's the sort of transfer link that when it sort of lands across your desk, you think, well, that can't happen. He went for 20 million. He's on 80 grand a week. It's a pipe dream, and there's just a little bit of interest. We're just chancing our arm, but like amazing work to get it over the line so quickly. I mean, when did that transfer go through? On the 11th or the 10th or something like that, which is very rare for Sunderland to get deals over the line so quickly. So I think it gives everybody a lift, everybody a boost. It drives standards. Lebris is raving about him, isn't he? In terms of Lebris mentioned in his post-match presser that he's known him since he was 10 or 11. So he feels he can get the best out of him. And the sort of the wonder kid rehabilitation factory continues, doesn't it? Because I know he's 24, but his career's just dropped off a little bit at Roma. He's had 3 managers in a season, and he just needs to go somewhere and play. By all accounts from the YouTube clips we watch from all of the experts that we've spoken to or listened to on European football, he's a top talent. Julian Laurens was saying that he was under consideration for Didier Deschamps' French squad at one point in time. There's the statistics. When he was at Lorient under Lebris, and his passing and his chance creation was up there with like Kylian Mbappe and all of that sort of stuff. So there's a fair bit to get excited about. Obviously, you don't know for sure until he plays for Sunderland, because at this club anything can go wrong. But it's hugely, hugely exciting, a massive positive to get it over the line early. And I think it indicates, doesn't it, that Sunderland's hierarchy are really serious about promotion this season and the chance we've got. We've talked about that chance, haven't we? We've got an opportunity here in January with the league as open as it is, with Sunderland having accumulated so many points already this season, that there's an opportunity there to go and maybe get promotion to the Premier League, or certainly get really, really close. The automatics are in touching distance. You'd back us in the playoffs. We just need a few more reinforcements. And it's good to see that one of those squad holes has been filled, not only filled, but filled with serious quality as well. And, there's a lot being said about his wages. Sunderland are covering the wages, but when you break it down, I think it works out as something like 1.7 million for the 6 months. So 1.7 million for 6 months to get a player of his quality in wages. It makes sense. There's no loan fee. Obviously, if Sunderland get promoted, they'll have an obligation to buy. He'll become Sunderland's highest ever transfer fee, which means we don't have to speak the name Didier Ndong anymore after that. So yeah, it's hugely positive. I'm fascinated to see how it works out. He can play as a 6, as an 8. He likes to advance the ball. There's a lot being said about who he's going to come in for, but I think it's excellent for Dan Neil and Joe Bellingham and Chris Rigg to have that competition now. I'm not saying they were complacent at all, far from it, but I think a good dressing room sees that transfer and thinks, 1, this is good for our squad and our promotion prospects, but 2, I really need to up my game now. And I think that's what you'll get from Rigg, Neil and Joe, because that's the sort of characters they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that. And also just rest and rotation options,
Yeah, of course.
3 young lads, even Dan Neil, I think we forget sometimes how young he still is. And, 3 young lads who played an awful lot of football out of necessity this season. So just having another body in there, someone who you would imagine Sunderland will be able to trust implicitly to probably raise, but at the very least maintain the standard of that midfield cohort. So, it's a really good deal for my money. And one that's got not just Sunderland fans, but, the sort of wider football and community really excited, which doesn't always happen with Sunderland transfers, does it? But this is one that's really caught the eye. Obviously, we are still in January, and it's going to be interesting to see where else Sunderland look to strengthen. One of the positions that we've spoke about a lot is fullback. And then obviously Adji Elise suffered that injury at the weekend. Still not got a proper diagnosis on how bad that is, but it's certainly it didn't look good, did it? And in his post-match press conference, Regis Lebris sort of suggested that he thought initially it looked like it could be a serious one for release. I mean, obviously, an awful blow for him because he's had such an awful run of luck with injuries, but also now Sunderland in a position where they need to go and get a fullback. Do you think?
I think so. It just leaves Dennis Serkin really at left back now, does not? Obviously, Niall Huggins is out for an extended period. Probably won't see him again this season. Luke O'Nien can play over at left back. Trey Hume can play over at left back, but obviously that's not ideal because then you take away from the centre of defence or right back. Where I mean, centrally Sunderland do have a few more options, but you could even argue at right back that it's sort of slim pickings as well. So I think it would be good if we could sign somebody who could perhaps play on both sides. I think. Obviously, normally that would be Huggins, but he's injured as well. I was gutted for Adji though. He's a player I really like, can play in multiple positions. You know, never seems to get any luck, does he really? But you know, the positive from the game I think was that Hjelde did okay. He did well playing in two different positions. His sort of transfer future might have been up in the air until this injury, but I think that injury pretty much signals that he's going to stay. Lebris strongly hinted towards that scenario in his post-match presser. So, yeah, gutted for Adji. You know, he seems like a really, really nice guy as well. As you say, he can't catch a break. But I think as well as goals, I think a bit of defensive cover is definitely a priority now. Those are the two I would say.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, I was impressed with Hjelde. I thought he did okay, to be perfectly honest. And I think that he's been a little bit of a forgotten man, hasn't he? But he's a body and he's an option. And we know that Lebris rates him. You know, he said before he gave him the captain's armband in that Carabao Cup game against Preston, if I remember rightly. So, you know, he clearly believes that there is a player in there. Again, a player who we're talking about, and he's still only 21. Like it's ludicrous, isn't it, how young this squad is and how we sort of brush over it sometimes. But you know, I think that I think you're right. I can't see Hjelde going now, and I think another option besides is needed. But yeah, like I said, that as far as Elise is concerned, you just hope that it's not as bad as it initially looked, because it's just so awful to see that, isn't it? A player who, like you say, is contributing to the season despite having injuries already, and a player who really does deserve to be able to just get a run of fitness, because you know it's obvious that he's a talent and he's a talent who needs to be playing football. So real shame on that one. Obviously, you mentioned there another priority for Sunderland is bringing in a striker. Couple of new transfer links over the weekend. One being Tom Cannon, who scored the penalty for Stoke City on Saturday and who was linked with Sunderland over the summer as well prior to moving to the Bet365 Stadium. And then the other one being Ben Brereton Diaz, who's currently on the books at Southampton. Just interested to get your thoughts on those two links, because they're two players who have proven that they can do it at a championship level, and two players who you would imagine would be able to come in and immediately ease some of that burden on Wilson Isidore.
Yeah, the Tom Cannon one I find really interesting because he's obviously a long-term Sunderland target. Sunderland lodged a couple of bids for him in the summer. He ended up going to Stoke City on loan. When we spoke to Pete Smith, who's the Stoke writer, before the game, during the preview pod, I asked him about Tom Cannon, and he said he couldn't see him being recalled in January. There's been reports since then that Leicester might want to cash in at around £7 million, but Pete was saying that he reckons Cannon could eventually go for sort of 10, 12 million. So unless Leicester are sort of desperate for cash now in terms of PSR or trying to manoeuvre in the Premier League, I'm not sure. I don't know Leicester's situation specifically. So I find that one really interesting because obviously Sunderland like him and have done for quite a while. He obviously scores goals against Sunderland. So in terms of being able to maybe shell out £7 million, I think that seems sort of doable. Whether he'd come here on loan until the end of the season, I'm not quite sure. The Diaz one, I don't really know how to read. He's reportedly preferring a move to Sheffield United on loan, where he spent time before. He's obviously a really, really talented player, can play off the left as well, where Sunderland have some injuries. I think I read with the Tom Cannon one as well that he has to be recalled from Stoke by Leicester by Wednesday, so that's certainly one to watch. But in terms of the two players, I can't speak whether either will definitely sign or not. But again, as with Lefebvre, it's encouraging to see Sunderland sort of ramping up their transfer business a little bit in terms of who they're going to target. Obviously, I know Cannon was a target last summer, but throw it back to last January or the January before, you wouldn't have foreseen Sunderland being linked with a player of the calibre of Diaz, would you? I know his circumstances have perhaps changed a little bit since then as well. He's not getting as much game time as he would like at Southampton. But it just to me signals that there's an opportunity in Sunderland's board are pushing a little bit here. So I'm really intrigued to see what happens. I'm really intrigued to see who we get. I expect to see us linked with a few more names. There's Evan Ferguson as well, who was linked before in the window. That's gone a bit quiet after the Bright manager and the CEO's comments. So I think there's probably lots at play. And a lot also obviously depends on selling clubs, on loan clubs, and what Sunderland can and can't afford, what they're willing to go to. So, yeah, watch this space, I would say, because it seems to be hotting up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you sort of mentioned in there, but we're in a situation now where Sunderland appear to be looking at players who can come in and make an immediate impact. It feels as if the mission statement's changed a little bit since the summer transfer window. It's not so much about bringing in players who fit that model. Obviously, it's served Sunderland really, really well if you look how far they've come in recent seasons. But it's not necessarily about bringing in players who they can develop this window. It seems to be more about bringing in players who are capable of making an immediate impact and sort of really pushing them towards what they will hope is an automatic promotion race this season, James. I think you're on mute there, mate.
My apologies. As I say, there's definitely an opportunity there. We can all see it. We can all sense it, can't we? We've got past Christmas and the new year, and we're still in the race. So yeah, I think it's hugely positive to see Sunderland's sort of transfer hierarchy moving on to maybe the next stage of their plan at Sunderland. Whether that should have happened before is a question for another day. Maybe it could have happened under Mowbray. We've spoke about that at length, but yeah, I think it's hugely positive and it's hugely exciting for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we are halfway through the January transfer window. There's still plenty of business to be done. Like James says, very much a case of watching this space. But that is all we've got time for on this week's show. Join us again next week when we'll be discussing all of the latest Sunderland news and developments. In the meantime, follow all the latest Black Cats news on the Sunderland Echo. You can give us a follow on social media as well. Thanks to James. Thanks to you for listening. We'll see you next week.
We should actually as well have a preview pod for the Burnley game tomorrow, I'm hoping. So I'll just tag that on the end. There's more roles coming.
There we go.
Great. Happy days. Thanks, Jez.